Welcome to NovoEDTalks, a podcast for authentic, honest conversations about talent development and the people shaping it. On this show, we sit down with leaders across learning and development, mentorship, leadership development, HR, and people strategy to talk about what's really working, what's changing, and what they're learning along the way. These aren't surface-level interviews. They're candid conversations about building skills, developing leaders, supporting managers, and creating experiences that actually move organizations forward. Before we jump in, a quick word about NovoEd. Founded at Stanford's Social Algorithms Lab in 2012, NovoEd is a people-centric talent development platform built for enterprises and training providers. Business transformation starts with people, and people perform better on NovoEd. In today's fast-changing landscape, upskilling requires a new approach. NovoEd makes it easy to move beyond the talent development status quo by combing social, collaborative, cohort-based learning with real-world application. The result is future-ready talent built on a platform designed to turn learning into measurable impact. Now, let's meet our guests for today's NovoEDTalks episode. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the NovoEDTalks podcast, a space for talent development trailblazers to get real. My name is Melissa Fiske. I'm the producer of the NovoEDTalks podcast, and today I am joined by Chris Chappell, who is the Director of Learning and Development at Weis Markets. Chris is a talent management, organizational development, and training leader with experience building and scaling end-to-end learning programs across both startups and established organizations. He develops the policies, processes, internal controls, and program infrastructure needed to support organizational growth while aligning learning strategy to business goals. Known as a trusted partner, he drives continuous improvement and measurable impact by collaborating with frontline teams, managers, and executives to improve performance and work environments. Chris, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on the NovoEDTalks podcast today. Welcome.
Pleasure speaking with you, Melissa. I'm looking forward to it.
Awesome. Well, why don't you start by just, introducing yourself a little bit more, your role and kind of the scope of learning and development that you're responsible for. From the sounds of it, no 2 days are the same for you.
Pretty much, yeah. It's always a new challenge. It's always something to try to bring into fruition and just to make real out of absolutely nothing. So that's the exciting part. But who am I? So for the last 3 years, I've been working for Weis Markets, which is a regional retail grocery chain. And we're in about 7 states. And we actually have our own distribution, transportation, and manufacturing capacity as well. So it's been kind of keeping with the type of organizations I've worked for, and that is fairly complex. So, if you look back to some of the health care organizations I worked for, they had their own health insurance, they had their own research, they were teaching hospitals. So it's always interesting.
Well, speaking of that, who are some of the learners that you're supporting, and I'm sure there's different types of learners that you're supporting with all of those different outlets there. But what pressures or challenges are these, different learners facing right now?
And that's actually a great question, in that we have learners at every level of the organization. So we are teaching our frontline associates, our middle managers, our leadership, and each one of those groups, those cohorts, have different challenges, of course. So for our frontline associates, it's finding the time to actually learn and not just doing their jobs. It's having an interest in learning and in developing out their careers. For middle managers, it's probably the hardest for them because they're literally drinking from a fire hose. And it's everything from how do I manage people properly and get productivity, to how do I be the best leader possible, to, in essence, knowing the jobs of their frontline associates. And for leaders, well, I think their challenge is really just making sure that their individual departments and the management teams in their departments are properly prepared, in that they have the right people in leadership, that they're doing succession planning correctly, and just making sure that the most fundamental thing, that their people, their frontline associates, have the best leadership and management possible so that they can then perform and be engaged in their work.
Yeah, absolutely. That's something that we actually talk that comes up a lot on this podcast is succession planning. I think people are really thinking about that as something they need to be much more strategic about right now in their organizations with, sometimes up to 5 generations in the workforce, right? Like how do we manage this and navigate this?
It, it is a challenge.
Yeah, yeah, certainly. If you picture kind of the ideal state of learning and development at your organization, what does that actually look like in practice?
So, ideal state. I would say, first of all, it is truly a learning and teaching culture that's really focused on continuous improvement, first off. People are teaching each other, they're learning socially, and it's all occurring organically. We're not forcing it, we're just providing them with the resources that they need. Um, Next up, I really want people to be intellectually curious. When I look at my team, and the thing that I admire the most about them is that curiosity, the willingness and desire to learn more. And the third thing is really, I just want people to take what they learn and apply it immediately in their performance environment to make things better and to see a positive ROI or business impact on the organization. And even more than the ROI and the business impact, that has an impact on them individually. And they feel more confident and able to do what they need to do at work.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, where do you feel there's still the biggest gap between that ideal state and where you are currently?
Oh boy. So
This always opens up a big can of worms. I feel
yeah, I was going to say, it feels like a big can of worms.
like.
So, in our culture, like in all organizations, we have our good parts of our culture, and we have some that are detrimental to the mission and to learning. And then there's some parts of the culture that are both. But the one that I'm thinking about specifically is our business, and especially in retail grocery. We have a lot of people who are great at execution and getting things done. They're operators. How, however, that is not necessarily going to mean that you are strategically thinking about learning and creating a learning organization. Now, what we've seen over the past, I don't know, I would say probably occurred before I started. Otherwise, I would not have been hired into this role. But our upper leadership really looking at how do we move the needle on this, where yes, we're still good at operating and executing, but we're also thinking strategically and um, building an organization that's continuously improving and also has growth within it for individuals who are looking for that.
That makes sense, and I'm sure a lot of organizations can relate.
We've really learned, obviously, that there are some downsides to doing that and neglecting the other parts that, you know, create the culture that is constantly observing and questioning and researching and learning and planning and acting and teaching and, you know, really taking a look at our business critically so that we can make it better for our customers, so that there's that symbiotic relationship between customer, associate, and company where everyone thrives, everyone wins.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the ideal. How are you kind of designing learning experiences to really ensure that learning sticks, in these environments, or maybe get people to shift that mindset a little bit to being more observant instead of just operational?
And isn't that the most important question? So we don't just train to train and for people to learn new things. And when we're thinking about how do we want to teach people, we start off at the very beginning with just good, solid adult learning theory principles and practices. So, explaining the why behind things, what's in it for me, why is it important to the company? And then on top of that, we'll tie in things that we know work within, if it's a classroom training or e-learning, it doesn't matter, but trying to make it interactive and engaging and relevant to the actual work that they do. Because if we don't, we know they're checked out. Then we usually try to tie in some sort of follow-up assignment. We'll just refer to it as homework, but where they actually have to take principles that they learned in the classroom, apply them in the real world, and then bring back the results. So, for instance, there's a training program that I put together for our district managers and regional operations specialists and the RVPs who oversee them. And in that program, they'll learn things like, root cause analysis, they'll learn risk assessment, a lot of different topics, but they'll take it out into the field, apply it to what they call their focus stores or stores that are having some problems, and then come back and in the next session for the first 90 minutes of that training, and they're usually a half-day training, they will report out on what they found, why it was beneficial, if it was beneficial. We want to know if it doesn't work, and then we'll correct that, but what their results were. And it keeps them accountable to learning in the moment, as well as trying to retain that knowledge into long-term memory and then applying it in the real world. And another thing that we've really been experimenting with is actively engaging the learners' managers by sending them questions after a training that someone's attended or has taken on our LMS. And then they can follow up with questions to ask, well, I understand that you learned this specific technique and that you're asked to apply it. Can you tell me what's happened?
That's great. So do you have, in those, when, you have those kind of 90-minute sessions where someone's reporting back on what worked, didn't work, or, when those folks are asking those questions, are there certain like signals or markers that you're looking for that says, oh, okay, they have learned this?
They really get it. Yeah, absolutely. And usually what it comes down to, and this is going to sound cliche and a little bit silly, but it's their excitement to report out on what they found. It's crazy because when that piece of knowledge clicks in your head, when it makes sense to you and you can see the benefit of it in the real world, I don't know, there's just something special about that. And I've never seen someone who's actually put in the work, did the homework, applied the lesson, come back and be like, yeah, I did it. And yeah, they really didn't do anything for me.
I love that. I don't think that's cliche at all, but I think that's such a good marker of it.
I think it goes back. Do you remember the ARCS model of adult learning theory? So part of that is satisfaction. So I think it speaks to that part of it.
There's been a shift from, what some folks have called soft skills to what many people are calling like durable or even, power skills now. Things like judgment or discernment, decision making, things like that. How is your team thinking about, skills development in this moment now where we're at, especially with AI and everything like that?
So this is probably the most interesting question yet. So about 3 years ago, I coined a phrase called meta skills and put together a proposal and ran it past my leadership. And while they liked the concept a lot, they didn't like the term a whole lot. They thought it'd be confusing or whatever, but these umbrella skills are so important to us and to me because it's not just about one function. It's not just about developing skills that are pertinent to IT or asset protection or human resources, but there are these skills that overarch absolutely everything. And I think they're the most important leadership skills that we can develop. Like, just to put it out there, I am a huge believer in leadership development. However, that's only one of these meta skills. There are so many more that are incredibly important, whether it is data analysis, continuous improvement, whether it is decision making, augmented thinking, resilience and grit is another one, systems thinking, critical thinking, courage, EQ, adaptability. I could go project management. I could just go on and on. There are these skills that just overarch any function. And I think with the the further adoption of AI, it'll take away the need for some of the discrete knowledge that is in a particular area, because we can go out and research that. We can find out. We can ask it about those things. But I don't think that we, at least yet, the technology is there where it can think critically, where it can look at a certain situation. Now, we can give it a try, but we're still going to have to be the human in the loop and analyze and look at its results to say, this makes sense, or this is a pile of garbage. So I think this is really the next advent of our leadership development for our executive levels, and then starting to push it down from there.
Yeah, absolutely. No, we're hearing that like kind of across the board, but you mentioned so many good ones there. We're going to have to clip that where it's just all of the list you give of everything, because I think those, especially in leadership development or more executive level development, like you're talking about, that becomes so important. But and really across the organization, but I like your thought process there where it's like, let's start here and then have it, branch down. How do you balance kind of building those, more human, as I like to call them, capabilities alongside maybe more like technical or role-based skills?
Oh boy. So for knowledge workers, I think these skills are far more important than they used to be. Take precedence over any role-based skills moving into the future, because I think AI is going to basically flatten the workplace in a way. I don't know when it's going to happen. I don't know what it's going to look like. Although the one thing that I do fully believe is something that when I was working with a group of younger people at another job, and we were part of a committee that was really defining how they and their people would get paid more for the skills and knowledge that they acquired. And one of my colleagues who was part of this committee, Sarah, she asked, why do we have to make these decisions? Why do we have to do this? And in one of my few moments of wisdom, I answered her this way. I said, if you don't do this, if you don't make these decisions and think about how you want this to be and create it, someone else will for you. And you may not like that.
I love that. It's a very, very deep moment. But great.
So I think the same with AI. I think that we are at a place where in our individual organizations, we need to define the future of work, and for specific positions that may or may not be there. Which kind of brings me to another point, and that is that AI isn't just a technological solution. Or a technological problem. It is also one that human resources needs to involve itself in deeply. I don't know if you've read the book by Jeff Woods, The AI-Driven Leader. If you haven't, I will plug that book for Mr. Woods, even though I do not know him. Fantastic book. Um, and it will get into a lot of what I've just talked about.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that that's definitely something that, and we've talked with some HR folks too on this podcast, and they've definitely brought that up and how what they're thinking about in terms of the different types of parameters and guardrails they need to put on using AI in their organizations. So I definitely think that's relevant to where we're at. We talked a little bit about it earlier, but how are you measuring the application of learning today, like across the board? Is it always just enthusiasm, or do you have any type of metrics or signals that carry more weight than others within your organization?
So I guess the easiest way to answer this question is to point out that we are a publicly traded company. So of course, our financials weigh heavily, and that we have a responsibility to our owner and to our stockholders. However, here's where my part comes in. However, you can't have long-term positive financial outcomes if you don't concentrate on the things that provide value to your customers and associates first. So from a root cause perspective, if you don't focus on your associates, you miss out on providing the very best value that keeps your customers returning with their dollars. And if you do that, then ultimately your financials suffer anyway. So I think I used the word symbiotic relationship or phrase symbiotic relationship before, and here it is again, and regardless of the fact that over like the last 4 or 5 decades, companies have taken a much different short-term approach to profits. I am 100% convinced that if you do not invest in your people, you will lose market share, and then you won't have any profits.
Yeah, I think that's a struggle for organizations, right? Because we are I don't know what it is about that us as humans that we're like, we need results. We need to see them now. It needs to happen. Like now. What can we do to like drive impact in 3 months? And obviously that's important, but I think that it needs to be balanced with exactly what you're talking about, where it's like, okay, but what are the bigger long-term plays that we're putting in place here that are going to make us, ready for the future and sustainable, really.
So what do we measure? We measure both leading and lagging measures. So some of our lagging measures would be our financials, our customer satisfaction measures. But if we look at what our leading measures are, and I wouldn't always even consider these leading measures, but they're the best that we have, it would be like our employee engagement, but that only happens once a year that you're really measuring that. So turnover really becomes that leading measure that's most important, because that we're measuring constantly and consistently. The other thing that I've done is started some work with some really brilliant data analytics students from a local but well-known university, and really looking at whether or not we can prove causation or correlation. Actually, I should flip those two, correlation or causation, with what we're doing in L&D and human resources, and whether we are having any significant impact on the metrics or KPIs that really matter to the business. And if we're not, then we need to adjust. Because if we're not providing value to the business, then there's no reason for us being here.
Yeah, absolutely. That's awesome. I love that you're working with kind of a local group of, students there to do. That's a great, relationship to have with with a local community there and a bunch of data analysts, because I feel like we all wish sometimes we had more access to that. So that's awesome. Switching gears a little bit and talking more about AI, we definitely touched on it there, but is teaching AI part of your learning strategy today? And if so, like, where are you seeing the most value with it?
So we're being asked again and again when we're going to be providing training on AI. Right now, we are being held up just a little bit until our company has its full AI strategy in place. But with that said, there are still pockets of the organization that have been experimenting, uh, including my own. For instance, we would not be able to do what we're doing currently without AI. We are in a position where we're implementing Workday learning, talent, and performance, and very much coming up to the end of that to go live. But as part of this, we wanted to refurbish and make most of our e-learnings available on cellular devices. Well, we had modules that were probably built starting in 2015 all the way up to the current day. They were built by people in-house as well as third party. They were built on every platform that you could possibly think of. Some were SCORM conformant, some were not. So how do you wrangle? And by the way, we started off with nearly 1,800 courses.
That
Yeah,
just made my head hurt.
it made me want to quit every other day.
I get that.
So what we did was realize that, we didn't have all the raw files. And even if we did, it wouldn't have been an efficient way to go about converting these. So we found that through some very tedious and roundabout ways of working with AI, we could get the materials out of the original format and then pull them into Articulate Rise and using their AI enablement as well to quickly stand up many of these courses. And the real beauty of it too is develop modern looking materials that were consistent with the brand. So that's one way that we've been using it. Another way, we use it as a thought partner. So the one thing that we've taken from, and I believe it's from the AI-driven leader, is the lesson that you as a human are the thought leader. AI is your thought partner. Literally, take whatever it is that you're prompting AI with, generative AI, that's what I'm talking about here. But anyway, prompt it, reprompt it, question it, tell it it's done a lousy job, that it needs to cite its sources, just make sure that what it's giving you is what is accurate and what is truly needed. So use your brain, think critically about it, think about how whatever the answer is fits into our organization or the problem at hand. And I think that's really enhanced our capabilities too.
How are you thinking about the trade-offs between efficiency and quality when it comes to AI? Do you have anything you want to kind of expand upon there?
I think my team and I are really trying to take a balanced approach regarding the trade-offs between efficiency and quality as it pertains to AI. So yeah, as I just spoke about, it's an incredible tool that boosts our productivity and allows us to do things that a team of 4 should not be able to do. And by the way, yes, my team is a team of 4 for 23,000 employees. Little busy, and I beg, borrow, steal, and rely upon the grace of others in a lot of cases. So in regard to quality, I feel like if you're you're working with AI in the right way, and going back to what we just spoke about regarding being a thought leader and AI being your thought partner, you can get great quality out of AI. So I think if you don't, what you run the risk of is being like an overly agreeable person, a people pleaser, and that AI wants to please you. It wants to give you answers, even if they're not the right answers or make no sense whatsoever. So, we like that person who's that people pleaser, but we don't necessarily trust them. And I think that's one of the ways that we ensure quality is not to trust initially. So we'll use AI for a first draft of a plan, or to ideate, or to build a course quickly. But we still know that there has to be a human in the loop, or an expert in the loop if it's one of our SMEs, and that they'll question the materials that AI produces, and even look for other things that they want to add into it that add that human element, that little touch that makes that learning even better than what AI had originally come up with. And I think we still need to question where the information comes from, prompt for only empirically proven information, make sure that the reference materials make sense and that they've already been vetted. And that's especially true, like if we're putting in our own materials, our own reference documents into the system, and especially important if it's data, is to make sure that that data is vetted and is good. Otherwise, you're going to get garbage out of it. And, yeah, we lose some efficiency and productivity ensuring the quality, but through this, systematic review, I think it's a good investment of spending that time really ensuring that the results that we got are what we want.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's so important. And I like the analogy of the people pleaser there, because it's so true. And it's, we have to be careful, because I think for people, it can start to make you be delusional, right? If they if you're using ChatGPT that's just, or any kind of AI tool that's just agreeing with you constantly. It's like, ooh, that's not good.
The other thing that I noticed about AI, and this was early on with my use of Grammarly. So can I proofread my own materials? Yes. Do I enjoy doing it as a dominant personality type that, just wants to be pushing through things and getting results? Not really. I really hate it. So, I decided I would buy Grammarly for myself, and I started using it. And what I found is, by looking at what it was suggesting and correcting, I actually learned from it as to then make fewer mistakes moving forward and improving my writing just by using and partnering with that tool.
Yeah. I mean, that makes sense. It's just constantly pointing out, like, hey, you're doing this wrong. And then it trains you to be like, oh yeah, I'm just going to stop doing it this time.
Oh my God. Our AI overlords are at work already.
I love it. As you look to the next few years, Chris, what do you believe L&D need? This is one of my favorite questions to ask. What do you believe that L&D learners or L&D leaders need to unlearn, and what do they need to double down on?
Okay, so this is actually one of my favorites here. And what it makes me think about is a quote that I heard. I don't know if I know who to attribute it to, but it rings so true. And the quote is, "Don't be so attached to your current self that you don't give your future self a chance." So I just think that this fits the AI situation so well, because we know that some people are going to not want to adjust to the new reality. if we even know what the new reality is. We just know that AI is going to be there. So have that willingness to learn and relearn and unlearn and be agile in your ability to incorporate new things into your work. Because if you don't, that's when AI will replace you in your job. So going back to the comment I made to my colleague Sarah, if you don't define what you want your job to be and what it's going to look like in a way that provides value, it probably won't exist.
I like that context you added there, like, and what do you want it to be, and like, will it provide value? Because you can't just, you've got to be thinking about that too. You've got to like almost sell it. What do you want to be doing, and how is it going to, make the organization, your group, whoever around you better, because that's got to be there too, right? I love that.
And trust me, I'm not a technologist. I'm a humanist at heart. I love that humans can create and do all these wonderful things. And it pains me to some degree that we're in this position, but there's also the reality of the current situation. And I still think that we can still be human, just augmented by this technology.
100%. And I would even go as far to say that it's now going to be more important maybe than ever to be human, like using technology. Like you are going to have to really, really think about intentionally everything that you're doing and adding in those like human capabilities like empathy or things like that, or right and wrong, and knowing how to apply those while using this technology. So we've had a lot of even just on this podcast, a lot of beautiful conversations come out about that, which I think gives me hope anyway for all of the new tech that's to come and how as humans will be using it. But Chris, to kind of close out our episode here, what's one lesson that you've learned as an L&D leader that you wish you'd known earlier in your career?
This is a hard one. This is difficult. I think the one thing that this is going to be a little weird because my mind has gone everywhere so far, from gratitude to the tenets of servant leadership to what I'm going to go with. And that is a little book called, give me 1 second here, Crucial Conversations. And it's a group out of, I believe, Harvard who wrote it. And this book is about how to have any difficult conversation with another human being and be effective. It doesn't mean that you don't talk about the hard thing. It doesn't mean that you don't create accountable situations, but that there is a methodology to doing this that is effective and preserves the relationship. And I think that's so important, because the one thing that we run into in teaching our people, especially our managers and leaders, how to manage and lead, is how to create environments where people hold themselves accountable. And then when that fails, how to have that conversation with them where they return to that and hold themselves accountable because you've said the things in the right way to get there. This would have helped me. I think this would help anyone in that role of supervisor on up. In fact, it'd probably even help everyone, because you could have this conversation with your spouse, your partner, it doesn't matter, your kids.
Well, Chris, that's a great note to end this episode on. Thank you so much for joining us on the NovoEDTalks podcast today. It was an absolute pleasure having you here.
Likewise. Love talking with you.
Awesome. And thank you to our listeners for tuning in to another episode of NovoEDTalks.